Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State Podcast, brought to you by the Michigan Brewers Guild, celebrating 25 years of camaraderie. The Great Beer State Podcast shares the stories of our member breweries and the rich community of Michigan beer and brewing. Listen in, have a beer, and then check out mibeer.com for a full listing of member breweries, events, and more opportunities to explore and support the Great Beer State. Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State Podcast. My name's Fred. I'm here with Scott, and we are here with episode 3 of season 3. We've got Erik Harms from 2021 Fall Beer Festival in Detroit, where we chatted with him. We've got a Brewer's Dozen, and love to check in general. We're in Michigan's 5th or 6th winter, I think, which is otherwise known as spring. Approaching our next public event, I guess, is the Spring Beer Festival in Traverse City. Is that the name of it, Scott? I'm probably butchering that.
Our beer festivals are all really cleverly and creatively named, and it is the Spring Beer Festival, not to be confused with the Winter Beer Festival, the Summer Beer Festival, or it gets really complicated in the fall because we have UP Fall Beer Festival and Detroit Fall Beer Festival. But yeah, we are calling it the 3rd annual inaugural Spring Beer Festival.
Excellent.
Which I was doing that making fun, but we wound up putting it on some of the promotional materials.
Well, so yeah, this is a beer festival that's been in the starting gate. If it were, a living being, it's ready, it's eager. It's been at the starting gate for a couple of years now. You want to share a little bit about the timing and the creation and maybe even the origin story of this festival that has yet to take place?
Sure. The Northern Lower Peninsula is kind of a void geographically for our events. And, we grew to 4 events after starting with the Summer Beer Festival in Ypsilanti and then doing the Winter Beer Festival over on the west side. And then when we added Marquette and Detroit, they kind of made sense geographically, as well as the large population base in Detroit to have Detroit and Ypsilanti. So there's this sort of void, and it's a pretty big challenge for us to think that we can produce another event, to think our members can add another event to their calendar. But we did decide that we wanted to do this. And we're committed to doing it. And we know it's going to take a few years to build it into what the other festivals seem like. But we decided to kick it off in 2020, and then COVID hit and it just, blew it out of the water. But we're at the ballpark. So it's nice that we're partnering with our friends from the Whitecaps, who a few years ago purchased the ballpark in Traverse City, which is now called Turtle Creek Stadium. It's not at the casino. It's at Chum's Corner, the ballpark that's been there. It's the home of the Pitt Spitters baseball team. And we're going to be inside the ballpark, not on the field. So the layout is going to be more spread out and look and feel different. I've been working on that. I've made a couple trips over there, and it's a real challenge. I guess I'm happy to say that we have 100 breweries coming, which is more than I expected. And it's been interesting figuring out where they're going to go, but we're going to be around the concourse. And then this ballpark has sort of a park-like setting out beyond the outfield. And a lot of breweries will be out there as well as on the concourse. So it's fun. We're getting things shaped together, trying to figure out the logistics of how to get everything set up and taken down and get it going. But yeah, it's really looking forward to May 7th. Which is the Mother's Day weekend, but it's on Saturday, so everybody can still do something with their mom, or bring your mom. And then you can have, just have brunch on Sunday or something.
Beer Fest tickets seem like a beautiful Mother's Day gift. You get to preempt your siblings, get in there first with a gift that makes mother happy before Mother's Day, and all your siblings will wish they thought of it.
Exactly.
So it reminds me a little bit of a Nebraska Beer Festival. I spoke at one of their beer fests. I think it was the Nebraska Brewers Guild. I can't remember, but they had it on a concourse of a minor league team. It was really cool. So,
well, we did that once before too. For those of you who remember, our Winter Beer Festival started in Old Town Lansing, and we were there for 2 years and realized it just wasn't going to fit there, and started exploring other ideas, which led us to to partner with the Whitecaps and be what is now LMCU ballpark. But the first year I really wanted to be inside the ballpark. And so we were in the concourse and up on top of the Pepsi Stadium Club.
Yes.
And it was pretty clear that there was a better idea, and we've been in the parking lot ever since.
Well, the 2 feet of snow that week didn't help any. So I don't want to rule that out for May 7th in Traverse City, but I think the odds are in our favor that we shouldn't have to deal with that.
Yeah.
So it's a little different deal. I remember that was an interesting configuration. So I'm sure this will be lovely and charming, and everybody should go. But
one of the great things, again, our festivals all build over time, and they build partly by word of mouth. We don't have a massive marketing campaign, although we definitely are promoting it. But the early years of any of our festivals are rather intimate and low key, and everybody out that I talk to has fond memories of being at the early days of any of the festivals. So that's something that won't happen again the first year and the second year and the third year.
That's right. And so this is a unique one because you can be both the third year and first year participant. You're going to collect 3 years of I was there first credits unavailable with any other rendition of the beer festival. I was there for the first 3 years can happen on one Saturday in May.
That's right.
All right. Well, it seems like a good time to jump to the Brewer's Dozen. We've started another round trip through our membership roles, and we are going alphabetically this time around. So, Scott, you want to start us off?
Yeah, and the point of this is to try and highlight all of our members periodically throughout our podcast. And so we hope if you hear a brewery you haven't been to or haven't been to in a while, that you'll think about going there and checking out their beer and atmosphere and supporting them. So let's start in Watervliet with Arclight Brewing Company.
And then over in Chesterfield Township, we've got Arctic Circle Brewing Company.
Arvon Brewing Company in Grand Rapids.
And Ascension Brewing Company in Novi.
Atwater Brewery in Detroit, plus
Atwater in Grand Rapids.
And then Atwater in the Park is in Grosse Pointe Park. They have several locations, obviously.
And then in Alpena, we've got Austin Brothers Beer Company.
And Baffin Brewing Company in St. Clair Shores.
Over in Lawton, we've got Barn Brewers.
And the last podcast episode that went up was at Barrel and Beam in Marquette.
And then we've got Batch Brewing Company in Detroit.
And we'll wrap it up with Beard's Brewery in Petoskey.
All right, that's the Brewer's Dozen for this episode. So now we get to introduce our good friend Erik Harms over at Dragonmead. One of the long-standing brewers for a brewer and for the guild. It's been around the community for a very long time. And super nice guy. It was really fun to get more of his history, and thus more of Dragonmead's history as well. Because I've known both for a long time, but this was one of those examples where I certainly learned a lot.
Yeah, and Erik has his whole tenure as a professional brewer has been at Dragonmead for more than 20 years. So that's noteworthy. It's a testament to him, and I would say to Dragonmead for having a great work environment, I suppose. But part of the story that I really thought was fun here was hearing about being in church, and his mom and his parents and he were associated with the church, and that's how he got tipped off that there might be a job opportunity. It was a connection through the church that actually played out and led to him being employed at Dragonmead.
Yeah, and I thought the relationship there with the Coonans, the family, the brewery, that is really just one of those real life, real warm examples of, I think, the relationship and connective tissue that exists in our community. And again, kind of seeing that on one hand as a member of the community ourselves is one thing, and then hearing his story and his take on that was really engaging and interesting.
Yeah, and it certainly is this, there's this passionate hub of home brewers that even after he got started brewing, they were still brewing on Sundays, and that runs through the owners at Dragonmead. That's how they got going, was this real kind of, I'm sure it was an obsessive passion for them. I understand how that works. And it's, I'll tie it back to our festival. National Homebrew Day this year is May 7th, the very day of our spring beer festival.
That's what it was waiting for. Yeah, and I think Erik, both you hear it through the interview and just knowing him as well, I think, he's a really compelling resource, because he has sort of all of the things. He's really generous with his information and his rooting interest and support for any other brewer, whether they be home brewer or professional brewer. And then, he's got this, I'd say it's both him and Dragonmead, but I think of him a lot in this. He has this balance of a lot of experience with figuring some things out on a small scale. So he has this experience and small scale that he's likely solved a problem that a younger, smaller brewer is running into.
Yeah.
Where I think sometimes there can be a little bit of a size gap of some of the tenured brewers are larger brewers. And so a small brewer is thinking, well, my problem's not going to, I can't necessarily go to them for help. They're at a wholly different scale. They're not dealing with this. And I think Erik is, he's dealt with it.
Well, not to drag this on too long, but you've been asking people if they have a great story to relate, and I liked how he was really quick to say, oh yeah, I've got several, and then relate a couple of them. So with that, we can probably go right to Erik Harms with the full interview. And cheers to Erik and Dragonmead.
Cheers to Erik. Cheers. All right. Hi, Erik.
Hey, Fred. How's it going?
Good. Great to sit with you. Thanks for spending some time with us.
Thanks for having me.
So we're telling stories about the Michigan Brewing Community and the Michigan Brewers Guild and how this all came together. And you and I have known each other a long time. You've been brewing in Michigan a long time. How did all that get started? When was your first intersection with brewing?
So my first intersection with brewing happened late in college. I was home for the summer, and my significant other at the time, her father was into home brewing. And he told me, I'd like to take you to this place I go to that's a brew on premise, and you can help me brew a batch of beer, and then we'll go back later when it's finished and you can help me bottle it. And I thought, wow, that sounds really cool. So I said, sure, I'm on board with that. So we go to this place just off of 8 Mile in Harper Woods called the Detroit Beer Factory.
Yeah.
So that was my first step into the Michigan craft beer scene.
Wow.
Directly. And it was kind of neat because after having that experience, once I became involved with Dragonmead, then I developed a much different and deeper relationship with Pat Scanlon and Doug Beatty and Clarence and Sandy and Jamar.
Yeah.
And went to Detroit Beer Factory sometimes to get ingredients if we were out of something, or if they needed something, I could bring malt or hops over.
Yeah.
So that was my initial experience into the Michigan craft.
So you're sort of a tag along for a brew at Detroit Beer Factory. What happens between that and being part of the Dragonmead crew and brewing professionally?
It was my senior year of college. I went to Wittenberg.
What year are we talking about here?
1998.
Okay.
So senior year in college, I went to a small private liberal arts college in South Central Ohio called Wittenberg University. I majored in chemistry there, and I was home for spring break. And I was at my dad's church. My dad's a Lutheran minister, and so I was home, and I was at a church service at the church, and my mother came up to me before the service started in her choir robes, and she said, I think I might have a job opportunity for you. I said, oh, really? What would it entail? And she said, well, one of the parishioners is opening a brewery, and they might be interested in having somebody on board with a chemistry degree. And that parishioner was Bill Roble.
Yeah.
And so I went to Dragonmead and interviewed with Larry Channel, and they said, yeah, we'd really like to bring you on board after graduation and get rolling into brewing. And so my brewing education started in earnest after going to bookstores and buying a bunch of books on home brewing. But then on top of learning on site from Bill Roble at that time at Dragonmead, I would also homebrew with a friend every Sunday in his basement. And that friend was Brett Coonan.
Wow.
And this was when he had the hardware and homebrew supply store, and before Coonan's opened as an actual brewery.
Yeah, that's some amazing timing. And so Dragonmead, they were up and running. Well, they came on board. It had to be pretty close.
They established in '97, but started operating and brewing beer in the spring of '98.
Wow, and were you opening brewer or?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep, I was opening brewer, and then shortly thereafter, there were two other brewers that came on board with me. It was Rob Nagel and Jeffrey Levine. And Jeff's still in the industry. He's worked at Atwater and Roke and now Griffin Claw. And then after Rob Nagel left Dragonmead, then we had Kim Schneider come on board.
Oh yeah.
And really, one thing I feel very fortunate about my time at Dragonmead is I've worked with a lot of fellow brewers who have just been fantastic people to work with, you know. So that's been wonderful.
Yeah. And some really sort of legacy people in terms of you know, it's a couple of decades, and you've got all these people that have kind of woven through. Many of them are still contributing in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing.
And the one coworker that's been with me there the longest, Jason Giroux, 15, 16 years we've been working together there. He called and then wanted to come in and see what commercial brewing was like, because he was thinking about going to Siebel to take the brewing course there. He's called us up. We made arrangements. He came in, had a great time with him, and then he went off to take the course. And when he was finished, I called him up and said, you know, I'd really like to have you come work here with me. And he did, and it's just been fantastic.
Wow. So what's it like sort of, you know, being that young and then kind of being part, I imagine, and you can kind of share what your responsibilities were in terms of, I'm thinking about forming a new brewery's voice in terms of the beers you make and how you make them and what sticks around and what your hallmarks become. I guess how much of that is, you know, ownership vision, and how much of that came through you in the brew house, and what was that like at that age?
It was very collaborative with ownership, and of course, similar to a lot of stories of craft breweries starting up, with their homebrew experience together, the three of them, the third owners, Earl Sherbarth, they would homebrew in his garage in Livonia. They were very experimental and very open to anything and everything. You know, if whatever I came up with, or my fellow brewers that came along with me after the fact, they were game for it. You know, even if it's putting a blend of hot peppers into a beer, going back to a time when that was very uncommon. I think the only commercial product was Cave Creek chili beer. Very collaborative with ownership. Ownership was very helpful with recipe formulation and development. We had a great system for that. And then also working with fellow brewers, like home brewing with Brett Coonan. You get great ideas. So yeah, they were pretty amenable to anything that we wanted to do. And, you know, that's still the way we operate to this day.
Yeah. And at that time, you know, I imagine, you know, the opportunity for inspiration for seeing what other people are doing is different than it is today.
Right.
In terms of availability of information, but also proximity to other brewers.
Absolutely.
And beer markets. So where did you draw inspiration from? What sort of beers were firing you up outside of what you were?
So I really like wheat beers, and I'm a big fan of fruited wheat beers. So one of the first fruited wheat beer recipes I did at Dragonmead was a raspberry wheat. And then another inspiration for a fruit beer that I produced at Dragonmead, our Castle Bright Apricot Ale. I really enjoyed Pyramid's Apricot Ale. So I'm like, I want to make something close to this. and was adept at making a good wheat beer at that time, but hadn't incorporated the fruit aspect. So I called up Erik Kunin, because I know they had been putting fruit in a number of their beers, and said, what's your approach? It's like, well, this is what we do, and try it out and see if it works for you. So that was very helpful at that moment in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
then, one more thing. Another book that was heavily used at Dragonmead, to the point where all the pages were separated from the binding, was Ray Daniels' Designing Great Beers.
oh yeah,
So yeah, we used that quite a bit.
cool. So, and I'm struck that being in the industry at that time, I recall, and your story is kind of bringing me back to there. Like the homebrewing community was really vibrant, and it still is, I think. But it's interesting that everybody you're talking about in your crew were homebrewing, and was there community beyond you all? Were you part of homebrew clubs, and were you connected to a larger fabric of community there?
I wasn't connected to a larger homebrew club community, but I was always very impressed with what Rochester Mills would do with the big brew there in the homebrew community, and then also Kunin's, tying in with their homebrew supply store, but having the Kunin brewers, the Kunin Guild of Brewers, the KGB homebrew club, that still exists to this day, and they have big events on site at Kunin's.
Yeah. And so as years went by, in 98 is a really formative time. It's essentially the year of the first Summer Beer Festival, and it's 1 year after, or it's the first full year of Brewers Guild founding. So what was it like to start to see and meet other breweries beyond Kunin and Detroit Beer Factory?
I feel really blessed, because at that moment in time there were so few of us. You could start to develop some deep and interesting relationships with people that, if you're stepping into the industry at this time, that you might not have access to or see. When we have a Michigan Brewers Guild meeting, and Larry's there, and Dave and Mike are there from Founders, and you've got just this great group of people, small group. It was just kind of neat. And then the fact that we were meeting at each other's locations and having frequent meetings, it made sense for that time and place.
Yep.
Something that you can't do now. But
right.
I feel very fortunate to have stepped into the industry at that time, because it was just kind of neat to be a part of that.
And what was do you remember your first awareness, your first invitation into a Brewers Guild connection? When did you first hear about it?
I honestly don't. It just we joined right away and just got right into it. And, and
the next
there
thing
it was.
you know, you're at meetings.
Next thing we know, we're at Craft Brow out in Kalamazoo for a meeting, or we're at Harper's in East Lansing, or just the original New Holland location. The Canal Street Founders location. It was really cool.
Yeah. So, what was your first beer festival then? Were you up and running for the first one?
I think we were up and running for the first one. Was the first one that had the tornado incident? Or
that was the second one.
The second one. Okay, so it was probably the second one.
Yep.
I think it was the second one.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Especially if you opened 98.
Yep, it was the second one.
A quick turnaround. So you mentioned the tornado. Tell me about that experience, and what was it like to go from not being in the brewing industry to now you're at a beer festival in Greenmead. What was that like?
It was a lot of fun, and looking back on that moment in time compared to the way the festivals are today and how well they're run and the size and scope of them, it's just sometimes amusing to think of us all under one tent that would house just one section of breweries today as the festival exists, serving our wares on the perimeter of the tent with all the attendees inside the tent. It's truly kind of mind-blowing when you look at where it is today, and also kind of funny to think about the fact that when we had the tornado warning, the emergency measures were, okay, everyone leave the site and go into the parking lot in your vehicles. That's really going to help you out if it gets dangerous.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it was fascinating, and it is amazing to think back to those times.
Everyone was very helpful, amongst each other with, I need this piece of gear, I don't have this piece of equipment, there's a problem with my draft box.
Yeah.
And I believe that still exists today, which is great.
Yeah. I remember one of my stories about that festival, well, it's either the first one or the second one, but it was Greenmead, where, John Lenardos was vice president of festivals, so he's out and about trying to run the festival and, barely able to deal with his table, which he also needs to do. Anyways, at some point, he left his table and all of his handles fell forward and were just pouring beer out. So I just remember that. I think we should close John's taps for him. That seems like a neighborly thing to do.
He will have nothing to serve.
It was just full chaos
Yeah.
when there are just faucets pouring beer
Yeah.
unattended. It was
Absolutely.
it just brings me back to that time. So as you think back to all the years, what do you attribute or how would you describe the change that's happened in the Michigan beer and brewing community? What happened from 1998 forward that made this possible?
Oh man, it seems like it didn't take very long for people to latch on to craft beer, and it kind of exploded. And about 2013 seems like when we really hit a big stride and expansion in the industry. But I feel like early on we're all trying to recreate these classic styles. That's our mantra at Dragonmead from overseas and legacy brewing countries, and then it reached a point where consumers kind of got savvy enough about beer that wasn't the fizzy yellow low ABV stuff made by all the macros in North America, to the point where they started exploring imported beer themselves. And then we transitioned into, the American spirit of let's make it our own and do off-color, off-centered things and color outside the lines. And I think that's great. It's interesting to see that it's gone to a level now where it's let's do something that's a fermented beverage. It's classified as beer legally, but it's an opportunity for somebody to open a blender drink in a can if they don't want to take the time to make a pina colada at home.
Mm-hmm.
It's just wild.
Yeah.
I didn't think we'd reach that level, but it's really interesting.
And how has that affected your decisions or your output at Dragonmead? How do you kind of navigate through a market that's had that dramatic of a change from what's beer to classic
styles,
beer styles to I'm not sure what beer is or isn't anymore. The rules are even hard to figure out.
We still stick to some of the classic styles from our legacy recipe portfolio, but at the same time, we're excited to try some of these new ideas and fermented beverages, and feel fortunate that we're able to do so because of our 3-barrel brew house, going back to the original opening of the brewery.
Yeah.
So with that 3-barrel brew house, we have the ability to play in that realm very easily, and then continue to supply the production end from the 20-barrel production facility.
Nice. So. And what does your footprint look like in terms of where does Dragonmead reach these days, and how's that changed over the years?
We're still distributed throughout most of the state of Michigan. We don't have coverage in the UP. We did for a time, and now we don't. It seems like it's been dialed back a little bit in terms of volume going out across the state. And I think, I don't think this is a negative, but consumers want to do hyper-local and want to support their hometown or region, and that's great. So then, because there are so many more operators on the scene, your volume might go down in state when you're farther afield from home base, but it's still been very solid in Southeast Michigan for us, and we're still distributed in all the places we have been historically, with the exception of the UP.
Yeah, great. And so, we have the sort of normal amounts of massive change in our industry in terms of it's really grown a lot in terms of what the marketplace looks like, the number of operators, as you mentioned, and then COVID happens. Major predicted and unprecedented change. Tell me a little bit about how that impacted you, and how did Dragonmead navigate through COVID and the shutdowns?
That was really, really tough. I mean, it just broke me up tremendously to be in a position where we have to furlough staff to the point where it's just myself as the brewing manager, production manager, keeping that side of the business operating, and our taproom manager and bookkeeper, the two of us being the only two in the facility for long chunks of time.
Wow.
It was just very rough. Felt so bad about that. And I was fortunate that we were able to have those instances where they opened it back up for, carry out, curbside pickup and such. So that was very helpful. But fortunate that we were in a situation with a microbrewer's license and a production facility and operating in the wholesale market to just be able to keep packaged product going out. There was a definite uptick in packaged vinyl being produced and packaged and going out to wholesale. That went way up.
Mm-hmm.
So, fortunately.
Yeah. And then where are you now? Kind of how, what does it look like at this point in time now that we're somewhat reopened?
It's gotten a lot better. We're just hitting our stride now, and we're starting to do well. But it's still difficult. It's still difficult, and it's not what it was, and I don't know that it can be, or if and when it will go back to a normal.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about that earlier. It's like I don't know that normal. What's normal anymore?
What is normal? Yeah.
It will always be post that event.
Right.
And I don't know what that means or what question it leads to, but I wonder if you have a changed perspective in terms of has what guides you in the brewery or in your industry, personally or on behalf of Dragonmead, has that last year and a half, has that changed how you ask yourself certain questions or what the answers are? Has it changed anything about this is what's important moving forward?
It definitely has. It definitely has. I feel like I'm counting my blessings more now, and I'm just glad that we are able to operate and continue to produce the beers that we want to and experiment, as well as supply our legacy portfolio beers to the wholesale market. But I feel like I took for granted the way things were before this all happened. So now I just feel even more fortunate, and I'm glad that we were able to weather the storm to some degree, and I just feel terrible for anyone who wasn't able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we talk a lot about, this whole project is a little bit about reviewing and collecting reflections on what makes Michigan stand out, what is the signature of this community. And as you've traveled about the world, and now that you've got decades of brewing experience behind you, what do you think is different about Michigan? What is the signature of the Michigan brewing scene compared to anywhere else in the world?
So I think we have a wonderful, abundant freshwater resource, which has been fantastic for us, and I think that's played a major role in our state doing so well with producing craft beer. But going from the early days of the Guild even until now, the widespread collaborative nature of so many of the operators, I think, has really been a linchpin in that regard. Because even today, new brewers, old brewers have helped out so many people and had so many other operators help me out as well, whether it's questions on SOPs or formulation of a recipe or just a need for a certain raw material.
Yeah. And do you, how do you see that in today's marketplace? Like, I don't know, what are your encouraging words or invitation to somebody who's opening a brewery now, or in the last few years? Like, what's the invitation to keep that going forward?
It seems to me at this point in time that large regional brewers, and there are those that have had trouble and are no longer with us because of what's happened. That segment seems to be fairly solid, and the small scale, hyper local neighborhood brewery model seems like it has a lot of room to grow and thrive and continue to be a solid part of the market. But that in between, which we're kind of a part of, it's becoming more and more of a struggle because of the amount of SKUs out there. I was talking to the owner of Ashley's, and we were talking about this very topic, and he brought up the phrase, the winification of beer. You just go in to the store and you're just overwhelmed. You know, how does the consumer approach that many options?
Yeah, and also they could love you or choose you for the first time because of any reason, the style or the label or recommendation, and they could buy you once, and the next day they could easily buy a different beer every day and not get back to you for a while. So that frequency of purchase from a given customer has changed.
I think it's
from where it used to be. It's like, I'm going to get Dragonmead every time I go to the store and maybe try something else as well.
Right.
That customer, I think, is less available these days.
Absolutely, I agree. It's from a consumer standpoint, it's pretty exciting and unique, but from a business standpoint, operator, manufacturer standpoint, it's tough because you don't have that. You might not have that repeat business.
And so, do you have any encouraging words for somebody who either is entering into that avenue right now, or even for yourself or somebody who has a more known brand and is watching the consumer behavior change? And how do you kind of stay relevant and stay engaged?
I think don't be afraid to reach out to other operators. Again, we're very collaborative in this state, and we love to talk to each other and help each other out. And if you're struggling with any facet of your new operation, there's somebody out there from another brewery that has been through it and is probably willing to help you out.
Yeah.
And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I love it. So you've mentioned a lot of colorful characters that have been part of your path along the way, and with this many years in, it's difficult to maybe call it up on the spot. But I wonder if you've got any favorite funny stories that you find yourself repeating in the cycle of stories of Michigan beer and Michigan brewing personalities. You got any go-to stories that crack you up from all the years?
Yeah, I've definitely got quite a few. I don't want to be reticent or nervous about embarrassing somebody, but for example, I've got a couple of summer beer fest stories, and these take place when the event was pre 2004, when it was on the Frog Island side of the park as opposed to the Riverside part of the park. So 2003 Summer Beer Fest, we show up early, we're setting up for Dragonmead, and we're almost done. It's getting close to open, and these two young women walk towards the table, and they tell me, hey, we're one of them I had already met previously, but we're from Kunin's, and we're supposed to be serving their beer, and nothing's ready yet. And at that time, we had the same wholesaler. It was all locked in that trailer.
Right.
So I helped them out, and then Kunin's were on the scene and got going. And one of those two women ended up starting a relationship with, and she's now my wife. And that same festival, I remember post-fest going out to side tracks and hitting the bars in Depot Town there.
Yep.
And when it was all said and done, hearing the next day that Erik and Brett Kunin were on their way back to the van that was parked up the hill, and Brett made it all the way into the van and reclined the chair and went to sleep. And Erik did not make it to the van and passed out up the hill and woke up with grass lines all over his face. And somebody apparently overnight had picked his pocket.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah.
So you got a bride out of the deal. Erik got grass lines on his face, and Brett slept it off in the van. That's pretty good.
And then another one, the Great Taste of the Midwest in Madison, Wisconsin, which is always the second Saturday in August. One year when we were out at Great Taste in our early 20s, and this goes back to when the University of Wisconsin allowed Madison Homebrewers and Tasters Guild to give us the option to stay in the dorms for the fest. So we were in a dorm. I think our floor was Kunin's, New Holland, and Dragonmead for sure on that floor. And somebody found a case of silly string.
Oh no.
And that got unloaded all over the study room. But then the next morning was outside with some fellow brewers, and we were sitting at a picnic table, and we had just been up all night. And Kunin's, because of Erik Sr., Brett and Erik's dad, they always like to get out of Dodge early. So the van pulls up alongside to leave the dorm facility, and Erik Sr. looks over and sees us sitting there drinking, and then there's somebody who was wrestling a cardboard box and did like a WWF suplex move on the box. And just reading his face and the thought process of, you guys never went to bed, and this is what you're doing right now, and I'm driving back to Michigan.
Yeah.
What is going on?
Yeah, we got a long haul back with you idiots.
And of course, at this stage in my life, those experiences have lessened to a degree.
Oh, it's great stuff. Anything in wrapping up? Anything you're looking forward to for the years ahead?
I'm very excited where Dragonmead's at right now with our staffing. Another brewer that works with us that I forgot to mention was Amanda Geiger, and she's worked at a number of breweries in Grand Rapids, and she's fantastic. Really love working with her. And she's created some nice, fantastic new beers, that some of which we're serving at the festival today. We've got a grapefruit IPA that she came up with. So I'm just, again, feel fortunate to have worked with a lot of great people at Dragonmead. Brad Etheridge is another one. Nice. He came to us, worked with us for a while, and then jumped off to Atwater and did great things there, and we're very excited. And one more story I'd like to share quickly that I just think is pretty impressive. So one of our servers at Dragonmead, Natalie, just amazing woman. She started out as a server at Dragonmead, fell in love with craft beer so much that she wanted to get into the maker side of it. And she did, and did everything to get to that point, and then worked at Motor City and at Fillmore 13, and I think there's might be another brewery in there I'm missing. But long story short, ended up at Founders and was brewing on the 300 barrel production system. Wow. And it was just a lot of fun to be at Winterfest one year and go with myself and Kim Schneider to visit her and have her give us a tour of that system. Wow. Just made me so happy.
Yeah, it's quite a path.
Yeah.
And
then now she is at the Founders Detroit.
Yeah, and it's remarkable. It really mirrors your story too, where an invitation to go along with to brew a beer at Detroit Beer Factory changes the course of your life, really.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. Well, thanks so much for being part of the community.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate all you do for the world, and keep on putting beautiful beers out.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening, watching, and sharing Michigan's Great Beer State podcast, supporting Michigan breweries and craft beer everywhere. Interviews featured here have been included in the book A Rising Tide, Stories of the Michigan Brewers Guild. They'll also be in the Great Beer State documentary coming out in July of 2022. Visit mibeer.com for brewery information, beer festivals, and 25th anniversary celebrations. We appreciate the support, encourage you to like, subscribe, and give us a review. From coast to coast, from far and near, let's drink Michigan beer. Cheers.